so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another. Which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the reflection and extension of you who will be here each Wednesday interviewing a different consciousness changemaker. And on the other 4 weekdays, leading the way to ensure that your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. Also, this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online, and you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's interview episode, I'm extremely excited to have the one and only Dennis McKenna here with me on the show. Dennis is a renowned researcher, lecturer, and author who is focused on the study of psychedelics and plant medicines for almost 50 years. Hey there, Dennis. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you. I've been looking forward to this one for quite some time. So many juicy things to pick your brain about. But before I dive in and start that whole rabbit hole, before we delve down that rabbit hole, I'd like to ask you, start off with the same question I always start off with. You're in an elevator. The guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
I think I would say psychedelics and the exploration of consciousness.
And we have 9 stores, nine
floors left
to go.
Oh, okay.
No, that's fine. You know what? Almost everyone has 9 stories left. It's just, I don't know why I came up with 10 at some point. I should say 1, right?
I could go on, but in a nutshell, between floor 1 and 3, I can say that, psychedelics
right.
and consciousness, and just generally, I guess what I'm passionate about as a person is, a passion about understanding the world and being curious, and I think that's why, among many other reasons, that's why I went into science, because, science. Pursued properly, pursued in the real spirit that it should be pursued, is the perfect thing for curious people. It's a way of asking questions of nature and getting answers back that kind of make sense, and that you can actually verify to an extent. So it's a powerful tool for that. That said, when it comes to something like psychedelics, psychedelics will throw into your face the limitations of science and limitations of knowledge in general, or what it is to know, because it forces you to confront a realm of experience that, cannot be glibly explained or explained away. People have these experiences and they don't know what to make of them. And which is fine. That doesn't devalue them, and it doesn't mean they're stupid. It means that these are complex experiences, and they're out of the ordinary, and that's why we're fascinated by them. But that's why they present this conundrum. If you want to know them, then you have to kind of make some assumptions. Among which are that certain aspects of it just may be beyond human understanding. You know, you can have an experience of a phenomenon without necessarily understanding what is causing it, you know. So psychedelics are that.
Right. Yeah, they definitely are. Some of the most powerful experiences I've had in my own journey have been with the use of psychedelics and how, I mean, yeah, and it's such a unique, experience for someone to have as well. I mean, it's never the exact same for any two people, right? And so to be on the path that you've been on for almost 50 years, and you know, it's quite fascinating to me to just the things that you've experienced and seen. I mean, how much can I get out of you in our time together here? Because I know there's so much, and for those that aren't aware, of course, your brother being the very well-known Terence McKenna, proponent of psychedelics, and you guys wrote books together, and very close brotherly connection, which is really fascinating. One seemed sort of like the scientist, and one more like the artist, I guess some would say. And so maybe you can give a little for those, because there are probably a lot of listeners, many of who know who you are and about Terence and all those things, but probably quite a few of our listeners that don't. So maybe you can give us the little bit of a background story, if you would, on yourself.
Well, sure, I can do that, and we didn't plan it this way, but you just opened the door to let me plug something else, which is my book, which is called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss: My Life with Terence McKenna. I wrote that in 2012. And it's kind of a memoir. It's been well received, and it's out there. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it off the website of the same name, Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. I'll send you a signed copy if you order it from there. But a lot of what motivated me to write the book was, Terence he passed on in 2000. And I wrote the book in 2011, and it came out in 2012. And I felt that enough time had passed and that I needed to tell my story, because he was very good at telling his story. And they overlap and they intertwine, but I never really, in a public way, went out and told, okay, this is my perspective on what happened and who we are and our life, So the book was very important for me to write, to get that out there. It was satisfying. It was not easy to write, but it was well received. And there was an existing fan base. I mean, Terence was much better known than I am. And so when I decided to write it, I did a Kickstarter campaign that was very successful. So essentially it bought me a year and a half of free time so I could write the book and pay for its publication. Wonderful. And it's been quite an experience ever since, because it's gotten me, for one thing, I get invited places, and I get invited to go on podcasts, and it's opened some doors. It's much better than a business card in that respect. And right. And then people read it, and they have so many people resonate with the things that happened. I mean, in some ways, we were children of the 60s, and we went through all that turbulent era, and we protested against the war. My brother was in the streets in Berkeley, and in 1968, I was on the streets of Boulder, during the war at the same time. So there was that whole era of political turmoil. But for us, psychedelics were part of this mix. But psychedelics seemed to us, in some ways, to be more relevant to our lives than the political situation, which, we'd pretty much given up on politics, being able to do anything viable, kind of like this era. I mean, I don't think anybody's looking to the idiots in the country, as far as getting anything accomplished or So you have to look for something different, something closer to home. And psychedelics seemed real to us in the sense that it was something that nobody could explain away. And one of the interesting sort of characteristics of psychedelics is you can talk endlessly about them. You can talk endlessly about the experiences. But sooner or later, if it's going to mean anything, you have to have the experience, and nobody can have it for you. It's like it's one of those things in life where nobody can have, sex for you, for example, or nobody, there are no substitutes.
People probably tried.
So psychedelics are one of those things that is quintessentially an encounter between you, the individual, and the psychedelic, however you want to think of that, as a medicine, as a teacher, as a plant teacher, as an intelligent entity, or whatever. But the thing is, it's up to you to have the experience, or you, an individual, to have it, and you're free to make of it what you will. And there will be plenty of people who will be happy to tell you what it's supposed to mean, what you should have experienced, what's wrong with you because you didn't experience that, but ultimately it's up to you. No one's psychedelic experience is any more or less valid than anybody else's. And I think that's part of its appeal. It's an individual thing that must be experienced. And that makes it kind of unique in today's world when we seek all sorts of stimuli and entertainment and so on. But many people seek those things, but psychedelics are the real deal. They're not distractions. If you do them properly, the best way to encounter psychedelics is to pay attention, because they have a lot to tell us. Or one way of putting it is that, or we can learn a lot from these experiences. And it touches on kind of the deepest emotional, spiritual experiences that people can have, and so and I think in our culture today, there's a certain longing for genuine experiences, especially genuinely rewarding spiritual experiences, because they're hard to come by. Religions don't, by and large, serve that up anymore. Maybe they did at one time, but now, they almost forbid you to have a genuine spiritual experience. That's not what organized religions are about. Organized religions are just institutions that basically want you to behave a certain way, so they're no different than any other authoritarian structure. Psychedelics are the anti-religion in a certain sense, because they don't have to happen in an institutional context. It's better if they don't. There are churches that use psychedelics. They've adopted it in, but originally the psychedelics were a one-on-one kind of thing, and if there was a practice or a structure around their use, it was shamanism, and shamanism is kind of like a religion, but in some ways it's the precursor of religion.
Right.
And I think it was developed in a sort of very practical sense as a tool for helping people navigate the psychedelic experience and these realms of other dimensions and so on. You got to have a map. You have to have if you're going to travel in these areas, you need a certain amount of techniques to keep your ship upright and find your way back home. That's the other thing. When the trip is over,
right,
you want to get back to a safe harbor, which we laughingly call consensus reality. But
right. Right. Which some people speculate is just a DMT trip in itself.
Probably is. In a way it is. Yes.
Right. So one thing that I would like to get a little context for everyone. So as you mentioned, back in the 60s, really starting down this road, and you went to the Amazon, a big part of your early research and experimentation was actually in Colombia with your brother. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And maybe you can share a little bit, about what went on down there. I know I had read some things that I'll ask you about in a minute that you had talked about down there, but just kind of curious what your, what your overall take of that whole experience is, and how it actually shifted, what's led to who you are today.
Right. Sure. I can talk about it. In fact, again, referring back to books, I would say to really understand why we went to South America in 1971, you have to read not only my book, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, but you have to read True Hallucinations, which my brother wrote. And in some ways, they're required reading. In some ways, that's a prequel to my book in a certain way, in that True Hallucinations does not focus on our whole lives. It doesn't cover our lives as mine does. It just focuses on those few months in 1971 when we went down there and all hell broke loose, basically, to put it bluntly. You characterize our trip down there as research. We certainly thought of it as research at the time. We thought of ourselves as scientists at the time. We were fairly serious about it. We had no idea what we were getting into, And this wasn't if we had a research agenda, it quickly got swept away. If we thought of ourselves as scientists, we were very quickly disabused of that notion.
Right.
We had a specific agenda to going to South America, which was that, in Berkeley in the 60s and so on, we kinds of psychedelic, or there were psychedelics around. Maybe I shouldn't say so many kinds. There weren't so many kinds. But one of the ones that occasionally came onto the radar screen was DMT. And DMT was fascinating to us, to Terence and I. We thought this was more than just a drug. We thought this was the most profound thing we'd ever encountered, not just drugs. I mean, we were sampling drugs, but this seemed an order of magnitude different in terms of its profundity, its significance, its bizarreness. It seemed like a true mystery, and we didn't know what kind of a mystery, but we felt sure it was a mystery. And we were, a lot of people these days, they come to psychedelics through a spiritual tradition. Maybe they practiced Eastern religious practices and so on, and maybe found them not entirely satisfying. So then they go to psychedelics. We didn't really come to this from a quest for spiritual enlightenment. We were actually steeped in science fiction at the time. Those were the influences that made Terry and I just weird and nerds, I guess that would be the modern term. We thought DMT was a portal to another dimension, and that those entities you encounter really were out there. And but the thing is, about DMT, anyone who's taken it will tell you, it's totally overwhelming. It's completely awesome and amazing, and it's too short. It only lasts about 15 or 20 minutes, and you can't come back from that experience with very much other than just an impression that you just had the most amazing experience of your life. But beyond that, you can't say a whole lot. It's like, you don't have enough time to really spend in that dimension, if that's what it was. So we had heard about this orally active form of DMT derived from Virola, one of the trees in South America that's used to make snuffs. And the sap of Virola is very high in DMT and other tryptamines, and they make snuffs out of it, and so their effects are very short, like smoking DMT. But there were a couple of tribes that had oral preparations that they made from this plant, and in our sort of naive approach to it, we thought, well, if it's oral, maybe it'll last longer, and maybe we can spend more time in it. And learn more about what's really going on. And so that was the, sort of very naive assumption that led us to take off for South America, drop out of school in 1971, go down there in search of this drug, which we called the mystery. And the people that had it, they called it ukuhe. That was the Witoto word for it, and it was the Witotos that had this drug. So we found a paper by Ari Schultes that was called, actually, Virola as an orally administered hallucinogen, and he's the ethnobotanist that's really the father of psychedelic ethnobotany. So we stumbled on this paper, and we read it, and we thought, aha, this is worth going after. Maybe this is the secret that we're looking for. And so we went, again, here we are, I was 20.
Going a lot further than the average guy goes to get some good stuff.
That's true. That's true, because we took it seriously. And we just felt that, again, with a sort of disillusionment with the social situation, the war, political dysfunction, societal dysfunction, we thought, we need something that is really revolutionary, that's really going to change everything. And and so we decided to go after this exotic drug, and we I guess that's an example. We were very much about, we're scientists, we're serious about this, but when we actually went through what it takes to get to La Chirera, which was no easy thing in those days, and then when we got to La Chirera, what we encountered there was not ukuhe, which took a while to track down because that was like a secret of the shamans. But when we went to La Chirera, why did we go to La Chirera? Maybe I should back up and explain that. We went to La Chirera because that was the ancestral home of the Witoto people. There was no, and it just, that's what the paper was written about, and so that's why we ended up going to La Chirera. When we went to La Chirera, which was a little Capuchin mission village on the banks of this river, the Igara-Paraná, a tributary of the Putumayo, which is a river that separates Colombia on the north and Peru on the south. So we had to go up this river and then across land 4 days and then to find this village. And when we got to this place, it turned out that they had cleared the forest for about 200 acres all around. They'd cut down the forest and they brought cattle in there, these humpbacked Cebu cattle. And the dung of those cattle happens to be the preferred substrate for Psilocybe cubensis, the pan-tropical psilocybin mushroom. Well, so we got there, and basically these mushrooms were pretty much everywhere, like growing big clusters out of every cow pie in the pasture. And, we knew what they were. We'd done our homework. We did not realize, it took us a while to realize that they were really the real mystery, not the ukui, which turned out to be kind of disappointing when we finally found it. But we'd gone there to look for the perfect orally active form of DMT, and it turns out psilocybin is actually the perfect orally active form of DMT. DMT and psilocin, the active principle of psilocybin is converted to psilocin in the body, and it's very, very close molecularly to DMT. It's just different enough that it's orally active. And so when we got to La Chorrera, these mushrooms were everywhere, and we knew what they were, but we didn't realize. It took a while for us to realize that they were really the mystery. At the time, we said, well, this is great. We approached them in a recreational manner, and we thought, well, we can nibble on these while, we're waiting for the real mystery to show up. It quickly demonstrated to us that they were the real mystery, and they had a lot of information to give to us. And
now, are they different than the psilocybin mushrooms that people would typically find here in the States?
No,
or
they're the same one.
Okay.
In fact, that's one of the things. If our trip to La Chorrera had any real lasting impact, it was that we brought spores back with us from La Chorrera, and we spent a couple of years figuring out how to grow these critters because we wanted to share these experiences with other people, or we wanted confirmation, I guess you could say, of all the absolutely crazy things that had happened to us in South America at La Chorrera when we started eating way too many of these mushrooms and sort of getting sucked into their reality. And we wanted to bring the mushrooms out so that we could, get them out to other people, so they could confirm or not that, either confirm that there really is something there to explore, or that we were completely nuts. And as it turns out, no, we weren't completely nuts. And, that is, a number of things came out of La Chorrera. We wrote books about it. Terence came back with this idea about the time wave zero. But the most lasting and impactful thing from the trip to La Chorrera was this very simple technique for growing the mushrooms that we developed over within a couple of years after coming back from La Chorrera. So suddenly, any reasonably intelligent 10th grader could, buy the materials to grow the mushrooms, and if he had the spores or she had the spores, set up a little operation in the basement and get going. And that happened all over the world. So in some ways that had an impact I think in more than any other single thing. It brought kind of into mass consciousness the idea of psychedelics, and in a positive way. And
that's a powerful thing. That's a really powerful thing, considering having interacted with a lot of people who've taken psychedelics, and it seems like mushrooms are probably at the top of the list, I would say, in my own encounters when I talk to people and they say, I had this first experience and it was with mushrooms and I've never been the same since, in a good way. It seems like that one is such a bridge for people. Like I said, that's just my own sort of experience.
I think your experience is shared by a lot of people, because they're strong psychedelic, but they're not.
They really are.
They're not threatening. in a way. I mean, they're kind of easy, at least at first. I mean, as we found out at La Chirera, they initially seem friendly, and then if you keep eating them, it can get very serious, But initially, they're non-toxic. They don't upset your stomach usually. They're kind of giggly and altogether very pleasant, and people find that's a way to kind of gently penetrate into those dimensions. And many people, who like mushrooms will take low doses. They take it as a social thing. Maybe they take a couple grams at most and go to a party or, spend time with their friends. And that's fine. Often they don't suspect that if they push the dose just a little bit higher, there are realms of bizarrity and strangeness that they may not suspect. It's full of surprises, and it's full of information. This is the interesting thing. It's full of information.
All right. Well, now seems like a good time to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I have ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting the Positive Head podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting this show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. They have a plethora of amazing content to always keep your positive head spinning. For example, in the brand new series Beyond the Legend, best-selling author of Chariot of the Gods, Eric von Daniken, takes us beyond the myths and legends that have shaped our view of history to present an alternate view of historical events, megalithic structures, and archaeological discoveries. Eric's been researching this stuff for over 50 years. So if you've ever wanted to deep dive into these sorts of topics that you're just not going to find on traditional networks, Eric is doing just that on Beyond the Legend. And that's just one example of fascinating content you can find on Gaia. As you all hear me constantly say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positive head. That's spelled GAIA.com/positive head. Check it out. Well, I saw an article, and it was you had written, and they were quoting you talking about during your experience there, building, tapping into some of this information and having an experience of what you felt like was building a hyperdimensional vehicle out of the 4D transformation of my own DNA interlaced with the DNA of a mushroom. I mean, that's quite the statement.
That's right. That's right. And we'll just leave it there, okay? Because
oh man,
it's so hard. It's so hard to explain it, and that's why you have to buy the book, because both of these books, True Hallucinations and Brotherhood, examine this in great detail. And in the second book, I spent about 3 chapters trying to unpack what was going on and what did all this mean, if anything, and and what are the implications of it. And so it's worth it for that reason for people to read the book, because for Terence and I was 20 when we went to South America. He was 24. None of us knew anything about anything, and both of us, as young men in their 20s often do, think they knew everything. We were pretty convinced we knew a great deal. One of the first lessons, and I think one of the ongoing lessons of psychedelics, of mushrooms, and especially ayahuasca, is that it will remind you, not always gently, but it will remind you, remember how little you know be cognizant of the limitations of your knowledge. And I think that's a good lesson for an individual. I think it's a good lesson for our species, in fact. You know, our species can be very ignorant and very arrogant about what we think we know. And, you know, our science is so impressive and all this, but at the end of the day, as ayahuasca sometimes say, I guess I can say this in a podcast, they say, you don't know shit.
Right.
You know, and never forget that you don't know shit. You know, and that's
we're babes in the woods, really.
But I think it's useful to acknowledge that, because if you say you're right, I really don't know anything for certain about very much of anything other than kind of the basic, you know, Cartesian datum of existence. I think, therefore I am. Beyond that, it's all up for grabs. But I feel like that clears the decks for learning. You know, if you assume that you know nothing, then you have a lot to learn. And I don't look at it as it's not a depressing thing. It's actually a challenging thing.
It makes things interesting. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. I'm fond of saying.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, Terence talked about, you know, his experience down there, and I always found it fascinating concept, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on it, where he talked about the mushroom, you know, sort of asserting itself as an extraterrestrial seeking a symbiotic relationship with humankind. And I thought that, I've always thought, you know, ever since I originally heard that, it's such a fascinating concept, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that concept.
Well, here's the thing. My thoughts, my feelings about this have evolved over time. When we were at La Chirera, it definitely seemed to present itself that way, whether it was the mushrooms themselves that were intelligent and giving us information, or they were a channel for something else that was transmitting information to them, through them, to us. And we very much bought into that model, that there was an intelligence either within the mushrooms or behind the mushrooms that were giving us all this information. And, you know, for a long time, I mean, I think, you know, that persisted beyond La Chirera. I mean, for many years, Terence, you know, I think thought of himself as being an ambassador for an extraterrestrial intelligence, which either, you know, had come across interstellar space as a mushroom, or had somehow, you know, gotten into the mushrooms from some other source. I mean, he really believed it, and I sort of believed it, you know, but I was inherently more skeptical than he was. But you know, I mean, if you know, if people spend a lot of time taking mushrooms, and if they screw up their courage and they do it in a way where you're not taking light doses, you know, you're taking the requisite Terence McKenna 5 dried grams, you know, challenge, if you will, and if you do that, and if you do it in the dark and you do it by yourself and you pay attention. If you pay attention, you'll be convinced that, you know, they've landed. I mean, it is very, very peculiar, and it has a very science fiction-ish cast to it. Most people don't go there, you know, and they keep it at a lighter dose level. And I don't say there's anything wrong with that, but I say that they may not.
Different experience.
They may not suspect that, you know, just around the corner, just a gram or two more, and they would find it very surprising. You know, so it is, you know, and then you know, it renders accessible this realm of experience, which is like nothing else you've ever experienced. It does not seem to be hard on the body. It's not an ordeal to take them. So it's very clean. As a psychedelic, it's not toxic. It's not dangerous in any way. That way, it's really not dangerous, except that it takes a certain amount of courage to have the experiences. And I guess the danger is that it gives you funny ideas, and funny ideas are inherently dangerous. Usually,
right.
Not to the person. I mean, they can be, but to, I guess the main
control system and culture, it can be a threat and has been perceived as that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes you have unconventional ideas, and that's why they've always been suppressed, because, the way our society is organized, religions, institutions, and so on, there are a lot of people who have, sort of appointed themselves as being authorized to tell you what you're supposed to think, about whatever. Psychedelics challenge that. And there'll be people that want to tell you what to think about psychedelics, but you don't have to believe them because you can see for yourself. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't require faith. In fact, it only requires courage. You don't have to accept a set of dogmas or anything. You can just find out for yourself, and you can make of it what you will. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about psychedelics. For each person, it's unique and it's different.
Right. Now you're doing leading retreats down to South America these days, ayahuasca retreats. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Which, I've had the experience, not doing them out of country, not in South America, but I've done some myself, and certainly profound experiences. What is your sort of 2 cents on that? Why ayahuasca versus, say, the mushroom? Or, in the case of the person that I've done them with, they actually, and I don't know if you've heard of this, they actually merged the two. That's one of the options of, you can take just straight ayahuasca, with this particular, person that leads the journeys, and or they have an option of a chocolate that is ayahuasca and mushrooms mixed. So curious as to what your thoughts are on mixing the two, and of course a little bit about your retreats and what you're doing there.
So lately, I mean, mushrooms were my earliest teachers. I didn't get into ayahuasca until somewhat later in life. Mm-hmm. Actually, when I went back to South America in 1981, my graduate work, my field work, was mostly focused on ayahuasca and also on ukuhe, this orally active form of DMT. But the bulk of my work and what actually got published and got attention was on ayahuasca. And it's a different kind of medicine, but it's also a form of DMT, It's an orally active form of DMT that's activated with monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So the phenomenology of what you might call the tryptamine dimension, if you want to think of it that way, and actually it's a useful metaphor, even if it's not literally true, but DMT, psilocybin, and ayahuasca at high doses will put you in pretty much that same place, very similar place. It's the tryptamine dimension. And so it's just a question of how you want to come to it. And ayahuasca has, for me, lately become what I think of as my primary teacher. And mushrooms, I don't disrespect them at all, and I take them occasionally, but ayahuasca I do pretty regularly, and I do it partly because I do these retreats, and it's a medicine you can take fairly regularly. So that's just my personal approach to it. As far as mixing mushrooms and ayahuasca, or mushroom and ayahuasca and any drug, really, even cannabis. They say ayahuasca is a jealous mistress, right?
Interesting.
I think that all of these are sacred medicines, and all of them should be accorded or afforded their own space. They shouldn't be mixed. Not because there's anything pharmacologically wrong with that, although there can be. And when you're talking about MAO inhibitors, mixing in MAO inhibitors, for example, you should not take it with MDMA. That's potentially very risky. You shouldn't take it with SSRIs, and we tell people they have to discontinue SSRIs if they want to take it, because there can be an interaction. But
between them and what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. MDMA and SSRIs?
Ayahuasca, the monoamine oxidase inhibitors in the ayahuasca, and things like MDMA, which are like, in some ways, they're like amphetamines. They have that kind of an activity. So they shouldn't be mixed. Right. But the reason I say, so there are pharmacological reasons, in the case of mushrooms and ayahuasca, it doesn't really apply, or it can. I think mushrooms are orally active. They don't need an MAO inhibitor to be orally active. If you're not getting a strong enough, response, just up the dose. Right. But it's, I do believe that each medicine deserves its own space. And if you're going to take ayahuasca, respect it enough to make that what you're doing. If you're going to take mushrooms, respect them enough to pay attention to what they have to tell you. But that said, that's my preference. That's what I. Yep. That's what I counsel.
It's a very reasonable.
Yeah. It's reasonable. But I'm not out there to wag my finger and tell people what they should do.
Right.
They'll find out soon enough.
You've done too many psychedelics for that, right?
Yeah.
To know better.
The psychedelics themselves will make it clear after a while.
Right.
So it's okay. If we were to, discourage experimentation with plants, this has been going on for who knows how long, 500,000 years or longer. We never would have gotten anywhere. So it's far be it for me to say, no, you must not mix this with that or do these things, because nobody really knows. Shamanism is essentially an experimental activity. And then the one thing I would say is, if you're going to do that, if you want to be an experimental ethnopharmacologist, you might call it, then know what you're doing. Inform yourself ahead of time. Use resources like Erowid.org, another great organization that I always love to mention, EROWID. You probably know it. Erowid.org. Best online resources about drugs of all sorts. But you can read up there on all these things, and if you're going to approach this experimentally, first of all, do your homework, as you would with anything you're approaching, so that you're informed about it. And then with that knowledge base, you can go out and experiment, but you know what the pitfalls are and what not to do and so on.
Right. Well, okay, so one thing that I'm interested in, and to mention to the listeners, you also have a research institute that you founded, the Hefter Research Institute, which basically is looking at, it's a nonprofit concerned with the investigation of potential therapeutic uses of psychedelic medicines. I'm curious what you have going on there. First off, what a wonderful thing that you're doing with that. I had Rick Doblin on not too long ago with MAPS. I'm sure you're familiar with him. And, same thing. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful area and so much to be learned. And, just taking a quick look at your site, and doing a little bit of research, it looks like you're seeing some promise for using mushrooms for cancer. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, so Hefter, hefter.org, hefter.org. We were founded about the same time as MAPS, and we're very similar to MAPS, except that MAPS is just better. It's bigger in terms of fundraising, publicity, doing all those things, and so it's much more well known. And Hefter's kind of, the nerdy one that sits by the side and never gets asked to dance, And so it's like that. But we do a lot of good work, and we, there was no plan to divide it this way, but the way it's turned out, MAPS is focused on MDMA, and they're doing
They're close to legalization. They think in the next few years.
They are going to get it approved as a prescription medicine. So, hats off to them.
Wonderful.
Hefter is
wonderful.
Focused on psilocybin, more or less, in similar things. I mean, we've been working with psilocybin. They work on MDMA. Nobody says you can't work on this or that, but that's just the way it's worked. And we've been doing very interesting work with psilocybin in a number of different areas. And I'm a founding board member of Hefter. I was there the day that we formed it at the Mount Baldy Zen Center outside LA.
I love
so
Mount
I'm
Baldy.
an old timer with Hefter. Unfortunately, I'm not the researchers, I should say, that are leading the charge now with psilocybin. It's mainly Roland Griffith's group at Johns Hopkins, Steve Ross's group at New York University, Charlie Grobe at UCLA, and a few other people affiliated. There's Peter, this is terrible, I can't remember, Mike Bogenschutz, and another gentleman working at the University of Alabama with psilocybin and cocaine addiction. So these people, this is our model. All of these people are established academics with track records, full tenure, respectable academic scientists, which I'm not really, and I never really even wanted to be, but they are. And so you have to have a certain amount of gravitas, I guess is the term, in order to pull this off in a straight scientific environment, and they have managed to do it. And the government is not funding this research, and they're unlikely to fund this research for quite a while because they still are afraid of it, basically, and they can't wrap their heads around the idea that, well, how can a drug of abuse actually be any good for anything? Well, that's a failure to define it correctly. But so I'm involved with Hefter, but I'm a spokesman, but I'm not.
Gotcha. Not
really leading the charge on the research right now. Younger, better, more competent people are doing that now.
Gotcha. Well, they couldn't have anyone better to be a spokesman from what I can tell. So, wonderful for me to see, and I know others, this kind of stuff where it's being taken being given its due, right? In a very serious manner with Hefter, with MAPS. You've got, I'm sure you're familiar with, the work being done with Iboga. I had Martin Palenko and Dan Engel, Deanne Adamson on all a while back talking about, it's just absolutely incredible. What they're doing with heroin, people who have heroin addictions, one
Yep.
dosage of iboga, and it's like rewiring their brain, and they're sort of fixed. It's like it's fascinating.
Well, it's not that simple, but yeah, it shows.
Well, yeah, maybe that's
it
a little
shows
oversimplification.
Great promise. It shows great promise for opiate addiction, especially in other kinds of addictions. That's right. And potentially, I think all of these things, I mean, here's the trick. They have the potential to revolutionize medicine and psychiatry, very much so, because these things can actually affect cures, and psychopharmacology or psychiatric medicine, which relies on psychopharmaceuticals, which are basically by and large not very effective, but that's the pharmacopoeia, and there's no, it's so hard to buck that because you've got big pharma, you've got big medicine, you've got big government, you've got all these things that are very much interested in making sure that things don't change, because they are in positions of power, and so psychedelics are a threat to all of these institutions in a way, because they're, in the first place, there's no way to make money off of them as there is with a regular pharmaceutical. I mean, things you take once or twice a lifetime, no profit there. It insists in order to use them effectively, you have to acknowledge that there is a spiritual component to healing, and medicine doesn't. They're uncomfortable with that, and they're still working on this mechanistic model that we're just complex machines, and if you apply the right molecular monkey wrench, it'll all be fine. It doesn't work that way. So, for these things to get accepted into mainstream medicine, it's going to happen slowly, and it's going to happen probably through the back door, in a certain way, like MDMA and the PTSD thing. MDMA is by far the most effective treatment, pharmacological treatment anyway, that we have for PTSD. Because PTSD is so prevalent and so many veterans have it, and just living in our society is a traumatic experience. So there's a desperate need for an effective medicine. So,
it's such a heart opener. It's such a heart opener. Okay,
nothing else works. Maybe we'll let you guys try this thing. Maybe it'll work, but they don't like the idea that it will work. But that's how it happens. And psilocybin similarly. I think psilocybin is going to find its way into mainstream medicine, probably initially through using it in terminal patients. Helping people come to terms with their impending death, and help them to face that in a way that is that takes the fear and the anxiety away. I mean medicine does not do death well, right? And yet sooner or later we all have to confront that. And so I think psilocybin is a tool that would enable medicine to develop protocols for dying, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherently strange or wrong or bad about the idea of having a beautiful death. We would all like to have a beautiful death.
It's a beautiful idea to me.
Have to have a death. And, so far nobody has gotten out of this thing alive, so we better...
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Is there any psychedelics out there that no one really maybe knows about, or, research chemicals, or anything that you're finding or know of that you're finding super interesting?
There is the whole area of research chemicals, and there's the work that Alexander Shulgin did made essentially hundreds of phenethylamines, similar, relatives of MDMA, made hundreds of tryptamines. He's a very talented chemist. And those are out there to be explored, and no one person could possibly sample them all unless you didn't do anything else. They're out there.
Right.
As an ethnopharmacologist, my orientation is toward plants, and there are some actually very interesting plants, and believe it or not, some barely known psychedelic plants. That's what
I was going to ask you.
This conference was about. The ESPD 50 was really, a lot of it was looking so much at the mainstream, the ones everyone knows about, although that said, we had presentations on ayahuasca, we had presentations on peyote, but kind of some of the lesser known aspects of those things. And then we had presentations on really the frontiers, finding plants that have traditions of use, maybe unknown chemistry. That's always exciting if you're oriented toward chemistry, finding new compounds. And that's what this conference was about, to look at
maybe tell us a little bit about it. Yeah, maybe now would be a good time to tell the listeners a little bit about ESPD and ESPD 50.
Yeah, well, ESPD stands for the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. And it's both personally meaningful to me and professionally, because the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs was a conference that was held in San Francisco, of all places, in 1967, sponsored by the National Institutes of Mental Health. So it was a U.S. government-sponsored conference. It was private, closed to the public, and the only thing the taxpayer who underwrote this ever got from it was this volume called The Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs, which was published by the U.S. government printing office. Originally, the idea was to have follow-up conferences about every 10 years to keep up with developments in the field. Well, between 1967, the war on drugs came along. The government became embarrassed that they had anything to do with this, and that never happened. And so, on the personal level, I encountered the volume when it was first published. I don't know how it fell into my hands, but in 1967 or 68, I got my hands on this volume, read it cover to cover, and then I realized, hey, I can make a career out of this. I mean, maybe this is what I should be doing. So it was influential in that sense. And for many years, I've wanted to essentially organize another symposium to commemorate the first one, and also to look back at all the work that's been done since then. So I wanted to do it on the 30th anniversary, but it didn't come together. So 2017 was the 50th anniversary, and we managed to pull it off. So we had it at this amazing venue in the UK called Tyringham Hall, and we had about 18 people come. We were able to get some donations to support it, and then also we were pre-selling the book. We're going to bring the book out, which will be this box set, the volume 1 from the first conference, which is free. It's in the public domain, that is, and then the second volume from this 2017 conference. So people are pre-ordering that book, and that's what's giving us the resources to go ahead and print it and so on. So if they want to order it, we highly encourage them. It will be a collector's item, and you can get it from esp50.com. Now, I realize...
Is it ESP or ESPD 50?
ESPD50.com.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. Now, I realize that there is a certain demographic here among younger folks who may not even have a very clear idea of what a book is. But for them, we're going to bring out an ebook that will come out about the same time as the printed book. They can buy that off the web, and then that book is linked into a whole bunch of stuff on the web, and including the original talks, which have been videoed and edited and so on. So the ebook will be the interactive portal into it. The printed book will be something that you can read if you happen to like dead trees and reading that way. It will certainly look elegant.
I was going to say live trees. It's funny. I was going to say if you like sitting under a live tree and reading, both, right?
Sit under a live tree and read the dead trees. Yeah, that's
yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, yeah, anyone out there who wants to hear what's on the cutting edge of, so they would basically get some insight into those things that I was just asking about. Super interesting plants that are out there that are lesser known and things that, people are looking towards.
It's not exclusively about psychedelics either. I mean, we talk about Iboga, for example. We talk about kratom.
Yeah.
We have one of our presenters, a guy named Dale Millard, who is like the naturalist. He's a self-taught guy. He knows a tremendous amount. But just before the conference, he was in Mozambique for a month exploring. Almost didn't make it out alive. It was apparently a rough trip, for various reasons. But in that expedition, he stumbled on a plant that nobody knew was a psychedelic, that it was being used by a group there, and he is going to talk about that. So there are discoveries to be made. Another significant one that people may already be aware of is Salvia divinorum. This wasn't even on the radar when the first conference was held. And Salvia divinorum is interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which it's not a true psychedelic. It is a kappa opiate agonist. There are 3 kinds of opiate receptors, and this one hits only the kappa receptors. And amazingly, it hits only that receptor, which is like, this is unheard of in a drug. Most drugs don't have that kind of selectivity for their receptors. They're dirty drugs. The term is dirty drugs. They overlap, like, LSD will hit, of course, most of the serotonin receptors, but also, dopamine receptors, adrenergic receptors. I mean, it's not that selective a drug.
Right.
And salvinorin A, which is this terpene that they've isolated from Salvia divinorum, is remarkable because it hits only the kappa opiate receptor, and it hits it very hard. It's comparable to LSD in potency at that receptor.
Yeah, salvia is very powerful.
Nitrogen, which is another interesting thing about it. Most psychoactive drugs are alkaloids or alkaloid-like substances, so they contain nitrogen. This is a terpene. It does not contain nitrogen, and yet it's kick-ass. And it's not legal. Yeah. It's not illegal in a lot of places.
Right. You can buy it at a head shop.
You can buy it at a head shop. And I think it's become not a big drug abuse problem because for most people, once is enough.
Yes, it's intense.
Right. It's not very easy to relate to. It's not, there are some people that really like it. My own impression was this is just too weird even for me, and it is very strange.
Right. Well, okay, so I have a big question for you. Is there or isn't there going to be a movie about your brother with Jim Carrey playing your brother? I don't know if you just saw his red carpet interview. It's within a week of us talking here now as we record. And a lot of people are like, what was he doing? He was acting so bizarre and, talking, definitely on a level that the average person is probably very confused by, know. And someone just said to me just before I told them I was going to be talking to you today, and they're like, And we brought up this movie thing that's sort of like a rumor, and curious to hear if it's really happening or if you know or not. But they said, I wonder if he was just, in role playing Terence on the red carpet. That was like method acting sort of thing, how you see them do sometimes. I thought, that is a great point. I wonder if he is. I'm going to ask Dennis this. So,
well, here's what I know. Which is not to say that it might not have changed, but here's what I know. I talked to Peter Bergman, who is the guy who put these video things about Terence out on YouTube, True Hallucinations and The Transcendental Object at the End of Time. He produced both of those. They are not movies as such. They're documentaries. Essentially, they're clips of Terence talking. So I wrote to him when people kept asking me about this Jim Carrey thing, and he said, no, so sorry, this was a rumor that got out of control, and there is no plans for Jim Carrey to play Terence in any movie, as far as he knows, and he was the originator. But you know how memes are. They can take a life of their own. Maybe somebody. Yeah,
I saw a movie poster. Someone photoshopped up, and Jim has the beard like Terence, and it's like
he could play a great.
He should do it. He should do it.
Well, but it depends on what are you going to do exactly. The thinking was that he. That there would be a movie made out of True Hallucinations, Well, Jim Carrey is much too old to play Terence at age 24.
That's true. That's a good point.
So it couldn't be that. It'd have to be some younger, edgier actor, more in the time frame. I don't think it's going to happen, and I think it's a rumor that got loose and. As rumors go, the people that are into this are only too happy to let it go, and who knows? But my information is that it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sorry.
That makes sense. And, well, you kind of burst my bubble saying with the age thing. I'm like, oh, yeah, that wouldn't make good sense, would it? But who knows? Maybe that'll be a spark for a future movie down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be a great one. Someone be playing Dennis down in Colombia in 1971.
Well, we talked about this for years, hoping that somebody would want to option the movie and make the movie. But so far, no one has done that. So So who knows? And maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't really matter.
Right.
The
Time shall tell. That's for sure.
Is inculcated into the culture anyway. So, it's well. Let's see. 1971. That was more than 50 years ago. No, wait. Sorry.
No, that would be like 40.
It was not quite 50 years ago.
46.
1967 is when the first ESPD was published. So here we are.
Right.
A long time ago.
Sorry. Another thing that I wanted to throw out so just earlier today, my son was dying to see this new movie, It. Okay. And I don't usually watch too many scary movies, but he convinced me, and it was actually really good. And it's all about fears arising. And it was funny because I was leaving there and soon after coming to talk to you. And it got me thinking of, the whole premise and this character in the movie, not to spoil it for anyone, but, it's based off this clown is sort of, it feeds off fear and an expression of fears. And I was thinking, it got me thinking during the movie when they were making that point about my own sort of psychedelic journeys and how a lot of times for me it's things have come up to how to overcome fears in that psychedelic sort of state, in that altered state. Mm-hmm. And then I thought of one of my favorite all-time quotes that I probably read 10 times on my show by your brother. That's all about facing your fear. So, I want to take a quick moment and read that because it just seems appropriate, and I love it, and I read it fairly regularly because I love it so. But Terence said, Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a featherbed. Such a beautiful quote. I just love it. And, it just kind of all tied together for me as I was heading to talk to you. I'm like, oh, this is all about fears. That's one of my favorite quotes. I should just read it and ask you, is that something that, have you seen that? I mean, is that something that's personal to my own experiences? And it hasn't always been, but is that something that has come up for you or in a lot of people that you've talked to? Obviously talked to a lot more people about their psychedelic, experiences than I have, where it's like a processing of fears and overcoming fears in these altered states.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think so. As I said before, the quintessential thing about psychedelics is that, it does not require faith. You don't have to have a belief system to make it work. In fact, it's almost better if you don't. What it does require is courage. Courage to sit and take the medicine, drink the cup, smoke the pipe, whatever it is you're doing, and it requires that you have enough confidence in yourself that you can take this, you're up to it. And anybody who doesn't have butterflies in the stomach or a little bit of trepidation before they go into one of these deep psychedelic states is not paying attention.
Right, for
They're
sure.
They're not paying attention. But that said, you can have that trepidation, and if you just say, well, I can take this, and whatever comes, just let it come. I mean, people get into trouble because they don't, in ayahuasca circles, we have a saying, trust the medicine. And that's part of it, but also trust yourself. You have to believe that you have the chops to have these experiences, and the medicine will honor that in a certain sense. So I think courage is a big part of it. Courage to do it, and then the courage to, to make of it what you will, to put your own unique perspective on it and your own interpretation, which is not like anyone else's in the world, right? So there are many, you can read about other people's experiences, you can read about what they think it's all about, and that's all valuable stuff. At the end of the day, the rubber meets the road between you and the medicine. And that's what's so valuable about it. No one can synthesize this experience for you. You have to have it yourself. That's the key thing.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's, as far as holding the space for these experiences, as we mentioned, you do journeys to South America, ayahuasca retreats. And if someone was interested in that, is this something that anyone can get involved with? And if so, how would they go about connecting with you?
Well, the first thing they do, if they want to come to my retreats, go to Symbio Life Sciences, SYMBIO, Life Sciences, go to the website, click on events, and then you'll go to the page where you can register for one or another of the retreats coming up this January, and you can also look at some information that is there to give you an idea what it's like. And we've been doing this for a while. We've been doing this regularly, and a big part of it, I have to say, are the people I'm privileged to work with. One of them is the shaman Wyra, just an amazing fellow on every level, a very good, skilled shaman, more importantly, a very decent human being. That's really important. He's humble. He doesn't have any ego tied up in this. And then our assistant and helper, Christina, who helps with the ceremonies and helps with every other aspect of organizing them. So if you go to symbiolifesciences.com, all one word, /events, then you'll get to the registration page. And we emphasize a few things. Number one is safety. We insist on a bit of preparation for people before they go into it. We want them to be assured that they're not in any physical danger. And we, encourage them to educate themselves. We have a medical screening form that is take no prisoners, very detailed, and you have to get past that if you're going to come to our retreats. For most people, it's not a challenge. I mean, most people can pass.
You're right.
Some people occasionally, I mean, I get people who, they'll email a whole list of psychopharmaceuticals that they're taking for this, that, or the other thing, and I basically say, you got to get off that stuff, before we can accept you. And then when we do it, we it's very structured. We're very much about creating the right environment so that we have 3 ceremonies. Each ceremony is separated by a day, and the day after is for integration, sharing experiences, kind of group therapy, just processing, what happened. So the sequence of 3 sessions we find is very good, because the first one kind of gets everybody into it. As Wyra says, the ayahuasca is in you. And then it stays in you for a long time. Even when you're not in sessions, it sticks around. And so the second session is where, things really open up, usually. Some deep work can be done. And the third session is more integrative. And that said, there's no hard and fast rule, but this is how we approach it. And one reason that we do this, other than, it's a gig, I'll admit, I make money from it. Hopefully we're not charging people too much. But more than that, it's just so rewarding for us, the 3 of us that organize this, to see what people go through. Some people, they just have transformative experiences, and you just feel like, it's not that
really done good.
We take credit for is to organize the event, and we're very much about, once they're in a place, we're very much about stepping back and let them have their own experience in this personal way. That's what I like so much about Wyra, the shaman, is the first thing he'll say is, I'm not a shaman. Okay, that's what I was hoping to hear. Right. There's no ego in it. And he says, the mushroom is the shaman, the mushroom, or the ayahuasca or the mushroom. But, it's the medicine is the teacher. And people have really incredible experiences that are meaningful, and they feel like it helps them. Some people come because they're just interested in spiritual exploration or spiritual development. Other people have specific issues, depression or trauma, different things. We're not treating any of this. It's not that structured. We believe the healing comes spontaneously. All we do is create an opportunity for that to happen in a way that's safe and supportive and
beautiful.
Yeah.
Very, very wonderful. I'm sure there will be some people out there that are interested in that. I've certainly had people contact me before seeking guidance.
Tell them to feel free to look at the website. We still have a few spots open in both sessions, so there's room at this point. But I imagine they will fill. They usually do.
Excellent. Well, I'd like, we're getting down to it here on our time, but one of the things that I always love to go to, I love a good story of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story, if you will, and curious if you have anything good like that to share.
Well, not that I can tell succinctly. You can read, True Hallucinations or The Brotherhood, and there's all sorts of anomalous phenomena. But I can't tell one story that might not seem that far out, but in a certain way, to me, it kind of exemplifies ayahuasca and the reality of the ayahuasca universe, if you want to put it that way, for the people that for whom it's just part of their lives. It's just a part of daily life, and their lives are very different than ours, and they're dreamlike in some ways. And one of the stories I like to tell is I was with my friend Luis Eduardo Luna, who's a shaman and an anthropologist. We were traveling in Pucallpa in 1985, and it was in that year that I introduced Eduardo to Pablo Amaringo, the visionary painter whose paintings he wrote a book about called Ayahuasca Visions. But that year we were nobody. We were, Pablo Amaringo was just this amateur painter that lived in a village, and Eduardo and I had gone to Pucallpa to meet and drink ayahuasca with Don Fidel, who was kind of a legendary fellow even at the time, and we we were there to see him and experience that, and so we'd been there some days, and one night we decided, or Don Fidel suggested that instead of doing it at his house for ceremony, we go over to his uncle's house, which was different across the village, some miles away. So we went over to his uncle's house, and we did ayahuasca. We did the ceremony. He had an adobe house, which was unusual for that area. Most of them are wooden and on stilts and that sort of thing. But this was an adobe house. We did the brew. It was not particularly strong in me, but strong enough. And toward the end of that time, about 3 a.m, I went outside to have a cigarette and just sort of collect my thoughts. I was pretty much done with the mareación, as they call it. I was not really stoned anymore, and it was a full moon night. And I was looking, just enjoying the evening, and I was looking at the moon shining through some branches and leaves of a tree and casting a shadow on the wall. And the shadow was just as clear as anything. It appeared to be an image of a young girl with a veil and over her head, and her hands folded in prayer, right? And this was a very strong impression, the pattern that these shadows made. So strong, in fact, that I went back inside and I told Eduardo, you got to come out here and look at this. This is, I'm either really loaded or this is going on, know?
Right.
And so he got up and he came out and he looked at it, and we both agreed that it was a remarkable pattern, right? So there was that, and we finished it and we went home. We didn't think too much about it. We got up the next morning and we went into town to meet with Pablo, whom we agreed we were going to see in the morning. And we met him, and he said, you didn't hear, he said, Francisco, who was another friend of ours and Pablo's nephew, he said Francisco's daughter, who was about 4 years old, died last night. And he said she had diarrhea, and it couldn't be stopped. They went to the clinic. They couldn't help. They went to find Don Fidel, for treatment, but he wasn't there. He was over at his uncle's place drinking ayahuasca with us, right? So they couldn't find him. And the little girl died. And
Wow.
that was a tragedy. That happens all the time. It doesn't make it, dysentery and that sort of thing, many children die of diarrhea. But so that happened. So he said, well, there'll be a reception for the little girl, kind of a wake, I guess you could say, at Francisco's house later tonight. So you have to come. So we went away. We came back about 6 o'clock in the evening, and everyone was there dressed in their finest, And I walked into the room, and there was a white crib laid out with the little girl in it, in a white dress with a white veil, with her hands folded, looking very peaceful. Looking, in fact, exactly like the image I'd seen the previous night at about the moment that she'd passed away. So I was pretty blown away by that, even though it's, so I thought, wow, this is synchronicity. Incredible. For sure.
Yeah. And and they were looking for the man who was with you as well.
They were looking for Don Fidel. That's right. Right.
Wow. And
it was, it's not a flashy thing, but it was a rather amazing coincidence that, and this little girl, when I saw her in this crib, essentially, she was the exact image of what I'd seen on the wall. So ayahuasca es medicina muy misterioso, as they say.
Definitely. Wow, that is actually a pretty phenomenal story. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and connect and share your wisdom and insight here on the show. This has been absolutely fascinating. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure the listeners have as well. I do have one final question I'd like to leave you with, and I always open with the same question, always close with the same question. And in 60 seconds or less, I'm curious, what is the meaning of life according to Dennis McKenna?
What is the meaning of life according to Dennis McKenna? Well, what I have learned from psychedelics is what we touched on earlier, which is they constantly remind me of the limitations of my knowledge, right? And so the meaning of life, I think, is to be humble because you don't know shit, but also be curious, so you don't know shit, but you have everything to learn. And I happen to be a person who likes to learn things. So that's what it is for me, is to try to understand as much about this marvelous world, this marvelous universe that we inhabit, as possible, and at the same time be comfortable and accept the idea that we're only ever going to understand a small fraction of what there is to know. Whatever we think we know, it's much weirder and it's much more marvelous than we can even imagine. So that, to me, is a good thing. That's a hopeful thing.
This has been weird in the most marvelous way. It's this conversation. Dennis, thank you so much, my friend. You are an inspiration, and I look forward to connecting with you in real life one day. Who knows? Maybe I'll make it down to one of your retreats in South America.
That would be wonderful. We'd love to see you. Thank you for inviting me. I had a great time.
It's been a real pleasure, Dennis. Until next time, journey well, my friend.
You too.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.